Council, and usual suspects. The finest kind are in tonight. I live at 222 Huntington Crescent, and I've been chasing this particular issue for a decade. It's been a long time, it's been a long haul, and I don't want to be redundant on some of the things that were said by other people tonight, so I'm going to make a few points. And one is, I heard, is it a hard line? I can tell you I was sitting at Regional Planning Council when they conceived and passed the hard line. And at that same series, next week, that when it went to Regional Council for approval, it was passed as a hard line and at the edge of the cities. And then at the very same council, it was reaffirmed by one of the regional councilors, it's not really a hard line, you know. It can change. And that was very true, because I also was at that planning committee when there were all sorts of people there asking for variances to expand the hard line. The hard line is never going to be a hard line. It's going to be something that is brought in, trotted out, and then tramped on, as we've just seen with this proposal for the encroachment. That's just a start. I'm a realist, but I've been following this for an awful long time, and I've done a lot of work in trying to do 7th-generation planning in this area, which is what we need. We're unique in Ontario with our 3 cities surrounded by our 4 townships. I remember when the city of Waterloo wasn't as big and Wilmot was a little bit bigger, because the city limits change, and that's part of the formula that the province comes down with, that you can expand your city limits because of need. You've got enough industrial land, you've got enough residential, and then it just spreads out further and further. So nobody here, I think, is naive to think that this is really the end of it and that we have protected everything on the other side of the Wilmot line if this goes forward. I agree it needs to be a provincial intervention. This is water. This is essential to life. This is liquid gold. It's been called a lot of things, but I'll tell you, if you buy it by the liter, it costs more than gas right now. Think of where the rest of the wells are right now. We've lost C.L. Myra production. It was never probably the biggest, but the closest well we have is in St. Clements, because everything else is already gone. It's not viable in this Waterloo Moraine that you saw on that map. You have to recognize that this is a finite resource. It is perfectly filtered the way it was. We did not have to add chlorine to it until we discovered that we had to do the Mannheim project to expand and bring the water in from the Grand. Up to that point, there was no chlorine in this water. It was pristine. This proposal of the pipeline will obviously put a greater risk of contaminants into the aquifer in a far more direct and concentrated route. The science is suspect. It needs to be a lot better tested before it can potentially lead to an unfortunate consequence to over 300,000 people. And until that happens, I think that it's a valid question that needs to be answered. I also believe there needs to be insurance policies taken out by the developer and payable to the city so that the taxpayers don't have to pick up the bill in short order for any failure of the pipes or this system, any contamination that gets directed down to the aquifer that isn't addressed. We already know that the Wilmot Township line is the top of the gravel, which is part of the filtration. It's actually near the top of the aquifer in some areas. I was also at Grand River Conservation when they announced that they had finally finished mapping what they thought was the actual aquifer under the region. It wasn't very long ago. And I'm very curious as to how many test wells ever got put into the area that is subdivision and was already decided to be urban from 1992 when they were doing that, because they didn't come up with that until about 4 years ago, I believe. I was at the meeting when they were presenting their map. So I don't think that there has been nearly as much testing on the viability of what's under there as what we're being alluded to, because it was already designated then as urban. Hindsight's 2020. And I was here during the Rim Park mess too. And I made a lot of presentations and opposed that. And if we had asked prudent questions and taken our time, we wouldn't have been rushed into a deal that nearly bankrupted the city. We need to continue to ask prudent questions, and tonight I heard a question as to how much is the replacement cost of those pipes. Did anyone hear an answer?
No way.
I want an answer, and so do the rest of the people here. I want to know the millions involved in the replacements of those pipes. I want to have a guarantee as to when they'll have to be replaced, and I'd like to have the region actually replace them rather than the city. Water is supposed to be controlled by the region. Let them take some of the responsibility, because we have had our tax increases. And it is not our obligation to provide profit for a developer that is building on sensitive land. So let's start asking prudent questions and demanding, on behalf of the citizens, some insurance. We've got the insurance capital of Canada sitting here, and our rent payments are being paid by to one of the biggest insurance companies. Can we not get a policy put in our name? And I'll tell you, it doesn't come cheap. It doesn't come cheap, but it should also cover contamination. Because if one...
for the 5 minutes.
Okay, 10 seconds. If 1 tablespoon of mineral oil can contaminate the drinking water for a fleet carrier of the U.S. Navy, how much damage will be done if oil spill from an oil tank goes into this system? And I heard tonight that this water is going to be collected from around the foundation of houses.
Okay,
Oil spills
stop
do
you there
occur.
now. Okay, Councilor Lilly,